Welcome to the Leadership Table, where faith, community, and leadership intersect. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Hairston, and today's conversation is one we've been looking forward to for a very long time. Today, we get a chance to talk to Miss Liz Brown, a trusted leader at the YMCA of Central Ohio, an organization with deep legacy in strengthening communities through youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. Liz, thank you for joining the Leadership Table.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me ask you this. You've been involved in community politics. You've been involved on the front lines of even Central Ohio. But what inspired you in this moment to really get involved with the Y?
I love that question. And so I am with the YWCA. Turn that M upside down.
Let me turn it around. YWCA. Let's make sure we say that right. Right? YWCA for all of those who are watching.
That's right. That W is important because it's actually a big part of my calling to the organization. I have been involved in community, in government, in politics. And what I love about YWCA are really two things. One is that we sit at the intersection of some of the most pressing issues in our community. So we work in housing and in childcare every single day. And if you think about our community, what families need to be able to get ahead, what families need to be able to reach the middle class, feel secure in the middle class, really any version of that. Those two issues are affecting Central Ohio families every day, one or both. So I love that, how relevant the organization is. The other thing I love about it and why it's uniquely where I want to be in this time is that we have this very cool model of service. We work on the front lines in those areas I talked about. So we're a frontline services organization, but we're also, by definition, an advocacy organization. So we don't believe in just serving people where they need it. We also believe in pushing for public policy and changes in our community to fight for a better playing field into the future, right? So we merge advocacy and frontline service, and we exist because both of those things are married together. We're not one or the other.
So let me ask you this. Now, at one point in time, and this is for all of those who are right here in Central Ohio, they may be most familiar when you were on city council.
Yeah.
How did the whole getting involved in politics take place, and how did you make that leap from city council to the YMWCA?
So originally, in getting on city council, you want me to go back there?
Yeah, go back.
So I had a career before joining city council that was between sort of government and campaigns. And I was raised to believe that government can be a force for good, right? And I really believe in the good that government can do. And so there was an opportunity back in 2015 where an incumbent member of city council wasn't running for reelection. So it felt like this opening to be able to use a lot of the work I'd done in my career up to that time and apply it in the best way I knew how, which is serving in office. It was a wild ride because at that time when I jumped in, I was pregnant with my first child. So I was memorable on the campaign trail, canvassing, knocking on doors, people would open and there would be this pregnant lady running for office. But it was wonderful. And I served 7 years in really one of the best places for doing the work of community and government that you can, right? City governments are so front-facing with community, solving everyday problems like, illegal dumping in your alley, right? That's affecting your psyche and your daily life, all the way up to big problems of early childhood education and sort of larger systemic issues. So it was time well spent at City Hall. But really, as my time in City Hall was marked by the first election of Donald Trump, which caused an urgency of local action to protect communities. It was marked by the COVID pandemic. It was marked by the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd. There were a lot that happened in those 7 years. And I felt lucky to be in the role. But at a certain point, I realized that if you're too based in policy and you're not based in like real world practitioner of how we're solving community problems, I was missing something. And so when the YWCA CEO position opened up, I really felt inspired by the opportunity to get closer to community and to understand how we serve people in the moment while fighting for change and not just working on that sort of policy generalist citywide level.
You know what? You bring up a great perspective because, I can remember when you were on city council, and I remember kind of the undercurrent, at least from those who I was talking to in relationship to politicians or elected officials. Maybe perhaps Liz is on city council and she's looking at, the bigger game, like, future offices. And so when you made that leap over to the Y, there was something to be said about that because, it said maybe perhaps she wasn't in it to try to, further her political career, but that she was now getting into the grassroots of, like you said, advocacy for being on the front line in terms of what this organization was doing. Is there any point where when you're dealing with Y situations and you go, I do miss the politics, I do miss the game, I do miss that because some of the decisions are being made in those rooms that are affecting our organization. Do you ever miss it?
I love that observation in the form of a question because I think it's exactly right. There are times that I might be frustrated by, a decision over here or over there, and I miss maybe being the one that's able to push these decisions. But what I have found is that I really do believe our local leaders want to listen. And so my voice, having worked with all these folks, and having those relationships with them, my voice being able to offer observations about what we're facing on the front lines is actually more powerful than I think, back when I was in office and not able to have that same real world experience that I'm sort of using to advise. And because of that, I think the decision making, while occasionally I think to myself, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to still be back over there? I ultimately don't miss it because I am proud of the advice and counsel I can offer in this position. What I do sometimes miss, though, is in elected office, you can be a generalist. There are so many different areas that you can work on like any given day. And there are, of course, times, right now, one of the things I'm most outraged by that's going on in our society is the really indiscriminate detention of people, of undocumented immigrants being pulled off the streets, right? And that's not something that the YWCA works on a regular basis. And so it's not something that I can sort of invest my time and energy into. As an elected official, you see anything harming your community members and you can get to work on it. So occasionally I miss that ability, but at the end of the day, housing and childcare, that's what I love, and that's what I think drives communities. So it's the right place to be.
How do you define the why to those who may be unfamiliar with some of the levels of advocacy, like you just talked about, some of the policy changes? I mean, you deal with affordable housing. You're dealing, again, with a lot of scenarios that are on the front line that people may not necessarily see, that are taking place behind closed doors. I mean, as a kid growing up in Columbus, we thought about the why in terms of going swimming and going to the gym.
Right.
But now later on in life, I go, wait a minute, hold on. The why serves a greater purpose, especially when we talk about the greater Columbus area. How do you explain or define some of the programs that you do at the Y?
Yeah. Well, I start always with our mission, which is eliminating racism and empowering women. Our YWCA's mission very proudly, that's stated on our logo. Like we can't move in community without centering the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. It's really our reason for existing. How do we do that? We do that by advocating for a better future and for policy change, and by serving people on the front lines. So we have 24 childcare sites all across the county. We're working with families every single day on one of their most critical and important needs and treasures, right? Their kiddos. And then we have multiple housing programs. One is to help single adult women who have been chronically homeless and who have disabilities, right? So we're really meeting women at their highest need and working with them on their journey towards self-sustainability. And then we also have a program that serves families who are actively experiencing homelessness. And our ability to provide trauma-informed, compassionate care in that moment that is one of the lowest times for families is, we hope, transformational on their path to security as well. So our mission of eliminating racism and empowering women is actually felt in the service work that we do every single day. That's how I try to explain it to people.
No, I appreciate that. Now, let me ask you this, because you talked about immigration, and I want to come back to that, because even though, the white man not going down that lane, that is something that is happening in our country. Perhaps even happening in our city in terms of the high ratio of brown and blacks who lives here in our city. But let me ask you this question, and I want to ask it in a way in which I don't want to get you in trouble with any funding, man, that the city provides. So at any point you want to plead the fifth, man, jump.
All right,
I'm gonna give you a parachute. But if you had to get a grade to the city of Columbus on affordable housing, or the availability of affordable housing, what grade would you give? A through F.
All right. So I gotta qualify my answer, because it isn't just the city who's responsible for it, right? So grading City Hall on having solved this big issue feels to me like a little bit of an unfair report card, right? Because it is a community problem. I would grade our entire community here in Columbus. So you look at Columbus and Franklin County, not the jurisdictions proper, but the community that's supposed to work to solve these problems. I mean, a C-. We have so much work to do when it comes to affordable housing. We not only don't have enough units available for everybody who needs housing, but when you look at our extremely low income population, for every 100 people who are extremely low income who need housing, we have something like 26 units available. So that pinch on folks that have no room to give in their daily lives is a real failing by our overall community to see the growth and quickly catalyze it into action, right? We've been reading these reports for over a decade on how quickly our region is growing. And it's taken us so long as a community. This is not a grade rating just on City Hall. As a community, to catalyze this data into urgent and robust action when it comes to housing availability.
And the reason why I asked that question, and I appreciate even the grade, because I think that's probably, perhaps, in my opinion, the same grade I would give, because I think it says that we're doing something, but can we be doing more? And then how much further do we have to go? Because, Columbus is becoming one of the largest city, if not the largest city in Ohio, one of the largest cities in the Midwest. So you have to admire the growth. And as much as I travel, especially throughout the state and throughout the country, people are always admiring our city. I mean, they look at it as a place where, hey, that's a great city to raise your family. But at the same time, when we think about affordable housing, I can look at pockets in Columbus, whether or not we're looking at the Italian Village area or the Franklinton area, Short North area, and I go, we see an expansiveness that has taken place maybe over the last 20, 25 years. But in terms of the affordable housing category, in terms of where income is matching up with what I pay for rent, or, where's my income is matching up with maybe even a possible mortgage payment. Where is that aligning at? And we're finding where people are, what they call the working poor. They're going to work every day. They may get that stigma of perhaps taking advantage of taxpayer dollars, but they're going to work every day, but can't afford some of the places to live. And then here we are as a city shutting down what someone may call a slum area, slum apartments. And so I think in terms of the wise advocacy, it's like your voice really does matter, because you guys, if not just yourself, are in the room with those decision makers to say, hey, we have the information to show that our city needs this type of help. And just so it just sounds as if the importance of the role that the Y plays is just so vital
Yeah.
to them listening a little bit more so than to the average person.
That is that feels really resonant. And I think that you get what I'm about to say on a gut level because of your having led a congregation. That the data that you're talking about is never just data to us when we're working in these grassroots roles, like the working poor. Just about 40% of the individuals who live in our homeless shelter, right, who are experiencing homelessness, just about 40% of them get up and go to work every day. And that's not a data point. Those are families that we're serving every day. And so I just really appreciate what you said because it's very real.
Right. No, I think it's real because of the fact that we all recognize, especially, like you mentioned before, from a pastoral perspective, I'm talking with people, whether or not it's in the congregation or whether or not it's just community in and of itself. And being a person who grew up in Columbus, I've watched the city grow and grow in a fantastic way, but still see those struggle points, still see those areas where, hey, as a city, I see maybe a pocket of individuals, call them developers, call them the 1% of America who's doing very well. But then you still see the struggle.
Yeah.
You still find some of the same challenges that have never disappeared. And the Y has always been there. The Y has been there in terms of us kids growing up somewhere where we can go and hang out during the summer. The Y is there in terms of trying to address some needs in terms of family scenarios. But here's my question. What does collaboration look like? What does partnership look like, especially as the Y builds relationships with other nonprofits or even the faith community? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think partnership at its best looks like organizations who see a problem from a different angle, right? Each of them has a slightly different view in on the problem, coming together on what a solution looks like, right? So that's where you see folks from the faith community, folks from nonprofits being able to come together to think about solutions for housing, to propose housing projects, right? Because we're all at that ground level, but we see it a little differently. And that's where you get, I think, a more comprehensive solution is not everybody subject to their own groupthink, right? But really a diversity of ideas and thoughts.
You mentioned before when you're talking about immigration, and I want to kind of back up and take a peek there. Are there any issues, because I can only imagine even as an elected official, having constituents probably, list you their problems and you go, hey, that's not what we do with this as a city. So I can imagine even from a Y perspective, there being issues on the front line and you go, well, that's not really part of a mission, but it is impacting the people we serve. And so when we look at immigration, when we look at, of course, housing, when we look at youth mentorship, when we look at those types of things where we go, wait a minute, maybe perhaps the Y can't speak to George Floyd, but we recognize that his death and death like those are impacting the people we serve. And so have you ever found in your leadership role where, hey, this may not be the alignment of the Y, but we got to dip our toes into this scenario, whether or not, again, it's immigration, youth mentoring. Columbus is dealing with truancy in terms of its school system. We're dealing with violence, even among our youth. We're seeing it in cities throughout Ohio, including Columbus. Has there ever been a moment where you said, hey, Y board or supporters of the Y, we need to dip our toes into some topic margins that are necessarily not part of our lane, but they're part of our constituency?
Yeah, great question. So I think that on most of the urgent issues in our country and in our community, we do have some kind of entry point into it. So it's whatever the problem is, you may not be solving it on the most obvious level, but you're having to handle it on some level. So if we use immigration as an example, we don't even touch immigration policy, right? Like that's not, it's at the federal level. It's not something the Y it has sort of baked into our mission. But we know and we believe in the dignity of serving all people.
Right.
And we know that actually what's beautiful about the United States Constitution is it does not rank people according to citizenship other than voting.
Right.
Other than that, the United States is built on the concept of a free society, which applies to everybody. And I'm not a lawyer, but it's something I deeply appreciate about our Constitution. And so we know that everybody has the right to be served, right? Whether that's in our public schools, in our service shelters, right? And so we often have to handle some of the fears and anxieties of our undocumented community because they do show up in our shelters. And so then we have to be a good steward of providing dignified care to everyone. And that means that, for example, with our board at the beginning of the year, when all of this was coming out from the Trump administration, we walked through what it would look like to have ICE show up at our door. We walked through how to follow the law and protect folks who live with us. And that's just a really very real part of what all nonprofits are confronting here in Columbus right now, and I think across the country.
No, I appreciate your response. Let me ask this question. Equity and access are huge themes right now. How is the Y working to remove barriers for underserved communities?
So one of the things that we are working really hard on right now is trying to, within our frontline services, so that's housing and childcare, we are trying to ensure that there are public resources commensurate with needs for both of those things, because I think of them as really a public good, but it's often about how much money a family has in order to be able to secure them. So there are some important state changes that we hope are made when it comes to childcare, so that more kids have access to high quality childcare. And we know that when you look at kindergarten readiness rates, there are huge racial disparities in when kids show up to the kindergarten door, whether they're prepared for kindergarten because of the way that resources move in our community. And of course, our schools focus on things like that. But we know that we have a role to play too, because we're an early childhood education provider. So we care deeply about serving every kid regardless of their ability to pay. And that means that we have to advocate for more resources from the state. And then we also have to get creative about fundraising and grants, right, so that we can keep that commitment to families. The same thing happens on the emergency shelter side. Homelessness has a disproportionate impact on folks who have been discriminated against for centuries in our country, and that means that we know homelessness disproportionately impacts Black members of our community. But we also know that the need to fully support a family so that they can access income security, housing security into the future, that's where we stand, right? We're not the policymakers, but we stand right here in this ability to work with individual families. And we believe we need to be fully funded to do that so that we can break down disparities and actually help all people have the kind of economic and housing security in their future that allows families to thrive, kids to thrive, future generations to thrive.
When you talk about homelessness, it just reminds me. I was in Los Angeles not too long ago, and I got to be honest with you, I was blown away by the level of homelessness.
Yeah.
I mean, the visual presentation of homelessness in one of the biggest cities in the country. I mean, from the beaches. I mean, and it was almost as if there was no boundary line for homelessness, and that the city, even though it had designated areas for people to live, literally a person, I was in a hotel, and literally a person can set up camp right on the sidewalk.
Wow.
And a matter of fact, I was in the Beverly Hills area at one point during my time, and I remember thinking to myself like, okay, I know Beverly Hills isn't going to deal with this. And literally, I'm going down the street near Rodeo Drive, which is one of the most expensive streets in America in terms of its stores and products. And there was homelessness right there. And so when I came back to Columbus, I was talking with someone who leads an organization that has to do with homelessness here in the city. And I asked him, I said, In LA, I could see it almost on every other corner. I mean, I couldn't go up the beach without seeing it. I couldn't shop in some of the most, well-to-do areas of LA. But in Columbus, I said, I never see it. I said, I'm just curious. And so I'm talking to them. And she said, she answered me and she says, Columbus has written rules about where homeless can be and where homeless can stay. And she made this observation, and you helped me understand this. She said, homeless in Columbus are there. We just don't want to see it. Mm-hmm. So we've created policies that made, the homeless live over here. And then when they live over there in those encampments under the bridges or, near roadways, we move them from there. Mm-hmm. And then she said it's an evolving circle, but it's a problem that we know is there, but we don't want to recognize it. Mm-hmm. And she said LA is so big that they can't hide it.
Yeah.
And so I thought as a city like Columbus who's growing and we're dealing with homeless problems, even among teens, young people, and adults and even seniors, how does the Y combatively just go at like the homeless scenario when sometimes those who make the rules, they know it's there, but they just don't want to see it.
Yeah. It's a great story about LA. There's this concept of, so this woman who used to run the, some homeless serving programs here wrote a paper on this concept of a tipping point for a city's experience of homelessness, that it can grow and grow and grow and feel, pretty unwieldy. And then you get to the tipping point. And once you kind of cross over that, you can't get the toothpaste back into the tube. Mm. And that is something that LA has experienced. That's something that Portland has experienced. New York, probably Denver at this point is pretty close to that. I'm not an expert on each of these cities, but Columbus, we are kind of on the precipice of that tipping point. If I'm not mixing my metaphors too much, we have a moment to really do more to help folks when you're unsheltered on the land, when you're living in encampments. It is the hardest situation for society to help kind of bring you back in, right? You lose your connective tissue with services and supports that help to ensure future security. So that is one thing that Community Shelter Board has to really, really deal with right now is this problem with containing our unsheltered homeless population. Some of the projections they've done show, if we don't change anything, in 3 years' time, we will have a 68% increase in unsheltered homelessness. Wow. So you will see it.
Wow. And
we see it more now. I feel like you probably have that same experience where we see it more now than we did even 5 years ago.
Right.
But that is right about sort of how Columbus has sort of moved and pushed encampments around. In terms of YWCA and sort of how we fit into this, we serve exclusively homeless families. Mm-hmm. So families experiencing homelessness in our community are guaranteed access to a shelter. Single adults, so the folks you end up seeing sleeping in, there are folks who sleep in the park across the street from my house, right? Like we see it. Those are single adults, and they often have a 4-5 week waiting list to get access to a shelter bed. And that's where the connective tissue to services really is frayed. So we advocate for homeless families and for the housing that needs to be created to ensure those families have a place to go. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest challenge we face every day in our shelter. And then we also form partnerships with other nonprofits, active partnerships with other nonprofits that serve single adults, so that we're never, I'm always advocating for homeless families because that's who we serve, but never against what single adults need in the homeless system too, right? Like what we need to be building is a fully round system that serves all people, right, who are experiencing housing interruptions. So part of what we do is have that coalition back to your earlier point, right? A coalition of people with different lenses and different views on the problem, sort of coming together to advocate for an overall system that functions more wholly for our community.
That's good. That's good. Well, Liz, I appreciate, man, your words of wisdom, because I think for all of those who may perhaps be listening and watching, what you are doing, again, we said it's on the front lines. I mean, you are working every day to make our city better. Let me ask you this question. What's exciting? What could you walk away today sharing with somebody about the exciting things happening with the Y, perhaps even in 2025 or 2026, that people can really get moved about?
You're really testing me today because there is so much that's hard right now. I have to really, really channel my excitement sometimes to make sure that I've got those silver linings to be optimistic about. So I will say one is that we are expanding our early childhood education services. So I talked to you about our commitment to serving every kid, and we are expanding to an additional site. That'll happen this fall, and we're going to be able to serve more kiddos. I am unequivocally so excited about what's in store for us being able to do that. And then I think this conversation about housing in Columbus is really hard because it is a long-term challenge. It's been building for a long time. It takes many years to solve, right? But even among those challenges, I recognize that our voice, YW's voice, is clear and strong about what needs to happen in our community. And so I'm excited about that, because if we are able to be clear and strong through this debate, this conversation, then I think we're helping create the right outcomes.
Well, you know what, Liz? Thank you for coming on today. I think today has been an enlightening, not just for myself, but for those who may perhaps be watching. I want to personally say thank you for your heart. Thank you for your commitment to justice. Thank you for your transparency in terms of just transformation in the city of Columbus. We need more leaders just like you. And I want to encourage all of those who, again, may perhaps be watching or listening, that we have some links below. If you want to be able to write a check, you want to get your credit card out and you want to give to the Y, because as she mentioned before, there are some budget cuts that's taking place on a level that's a lot higher than where we are right now. But we always want to be in a position where we can give back to our community, and it starts with us. And so click on the link if you want to get involved with the Y, or you want to give financially. And again, we want to encourage all of you that if you're watching today, always remember to put yourself in a position where you can serve, put yourself in a position where you can give back, and to remember mostly that there's always room at the table for you. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Hairston. Until the next time, remember to keep the faith.
Boxland Media. Think big.